Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Elliott Abrams is with us. Elliott is an old friend and a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington. He has served in important foreign policy positions for Presidents Reagan, George W. Bush, and Trump. His latest book, and he's written at least 9, is entitled If You Will It, Rebuilding Jewish Peoplehood for the 21st Century. I read it, and it's an amazing work of illuminating analysis and advocacy. Tectonic events have gone down in the Middle East for 2,000 years, the latest being the October 7, 2023 atrocity and the subsequent events in Gaza. Elliott can give us an educated assessment as to how it will all play out. We're pleased to welcome Elliott Abrams back to the program. Well, I see you wrote this before Trump was elected because it said Jewish peoplehood. And now I don't know what you would say, Jewish men and women or just Jews.
Oh, I do it. I wrote it actually before October 7th, and then, of course, a bit of a rewrite after October 7th. But we didn't change the title.
You didn't change the title. Well, let me ask you, did October 7th change anything? It was Israel's 9/11. What did it change?
It changed a number of things for the American Jewish community here. And of course, it changed a lot of things in terms of Israeli national security. From the Israeli point of view, I think what it showed them was that they had a really faulty concept, which was don't worry about the buildup of arms on the part of enemies. Just think about, are they deterred? What are they thinking? What policies are they following? And it turned out that that was disastrously wrong. They thought they had some kind of modus vivendi with Hamas, and it was actually just a trick on the part of Hamas. They're not going to do that again, either in Gaza or in Lebanon. So they've certainly learned something about how to deal with enemies. And there is an implication, of course, if I'm right about that they're not going to permit Iran to get a nuclear weapon.
Well, there was an obvious breakdown of intelligence. The Israelis are supposed to have the best intelligence in the world. Their agency, Mossad, so much has been written about them. How did they miss it?
Well, they've redeemed their reputation with respect to Hezbollah. That is, Mossad obviously had permeated Hezbollah and had all the information they needed about who was where, the famous pager and walkie-talkie program that they had. But I think when it came to Gaza, they were relying on this idea that they understood Hamas, that Hamas just wanted to rule Gaza, and Hamas was deterred from any major action against Israel. That is, they thought they understood what was going on inside the heads of the Hamas leadership, and they didn't. And that's a lesson they've learned now. Don't worry about, practicing psychiatry. This is a military confrontation. Worry about who's got what weaponry.
So they should practice surgery instead of psychiatry.
That's a better analogy. Yep.
Better analogy. So now we seem to be in the middle, Elliott, of a peace scare. So hard to achieve peace in the Middle East. We've had the two-state solution, we've had Camp David, we've had the roadmap, we've had Oslo. It's unending, and nothing seems to solve the problem. But now we're moving from phase 1 to phase 2 of the so-called Hamas-Israeli truce. Do you think it's going to hold? And there's been a release of additional hostages, which was announced today, a release of dead hostages, very sadly. But do you think we're moving toward some sort of resolution of this conflict?
Well, it depends what conflict you're referring to. If you mean the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, no. I think that the essence of Palestinian nationalism remains not state building, not building a Palestinian state, but instead destroying the Jewish state, destroying Israel. And that's no way to end the conflict. I mean, Trump has a way to end the conflict, which is to move 2 million Gazans out of there. But that, in my view, is not going to happen. I do think there will be this hostage release of, I think the number is 4 dead bodies and 6 living people. Then you have to get into phase 2. And I'm a bit optimistic that there'll be a way to get there because both sides seem to not want to return to war instantly. I'm really struck by the Arab reaction to Trump's proposal that Gazans be, in essence, allowed to leave, even encouraged to leave.
Or how about forced to leave?
Well, that's not what Trump is talking about. Trump has not talked about anybody, putting a gun to any Gazan's head and saying, you must go. But remember, Germany took 1 million, maybe over 1 million, 1.2 million Syrians. Iraq and Jordan took lots of Syrians. Jordan took lots of Iraqis. Turkey took lots of Iraqis and Syrians. The idea that Arab states are opposed to taking refugees is wrong. There's just one exception. Palestinians aren't allowed to leave. I mean, think of every war in the last century or so. World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Afghan War. Civilians are always able to get out of the way of the fighting. The only civilians in the world who are not allowed to get out of the way of the fighting, who are never allowed to leave, are Palestinians. And I think the reason for that is they have to show their steadfastness in the struggle against Israel. That's why the Arab states don't want them to leave. And that's really quite inhuman. And Trump, in the statement he made about this, actually talked about nobody can live in Gaza like a normal person. Why can't these people have normal lives? No Arab foreign minister has actually said anything as humane as that about Gazans. But it's not going to happen, I think.
Well, there is the argument under international law, which I suppose is relevant here, that when one country or one group unjustifiably invades another and loses, they lose their sovereignty. And this is what happened in 1945 in the so-called Sudetenland. Sudeten Germans were relocated in Germany, where they've been very happy and they've prospered. There is the Treaty of Lausanne in the 1920s, where Greeks and Turkey exchanged populations. And there are other examples in history. So what is so immoral about having the Palestinians live in Arab countries of their choice? And isn't the problem not that they can't get out, it's that no one's willing to take them? You encountered that in the Bush administration with Guantanamo. You wanted to close Guantanamo, but you couldn't find any country willing to take the prisoners.
Well, 2 aspects to this. One is that they are not allowed to leave. That is, Egypt closed the border, and Egypt has not accepted the idea that any substantial number or any number of Palestinians would move there. The King of Jordan was in Washington last week and graciously said he would take 2,000 sick children. 2,000? I mean, there's 2 million Gazans. So that's the first problem. If you offered them visas, who knows how many would actually voluntarily leave because they want a better life for their children. But then we get to your second point. Nobody's offering visas. Nobody in Europe. Certainly the United States is not, the Canadians are not, the Australians are not, and the Arabs are not. And in this, Palestinians are actually unique. Because as I noted before, I mean, 1 million Syrians were welcomed in Germany, but nobody anywhere is saying, yes, let's have 1 million Palestinians come here. And again, I think the reason is that they want to maintain this kind of struggle that says we will never accept that Israel is permanently here.
Well, that seems to be the issue. But what about the Israelis? Can't they offer them visas and safe passage to another country?
Well, they could certainly offer them safe passage, but to where? I mean,
Well, that's at the end of the day, that's the question: who will take the Palestinians?
yeah. I mean, there's plenty of space in the sense that Sinai is largely empty. There are large empty areas in Jordan. There are large empty areas in Saudi Arabia, but they're not going to do it. I think President Trump will find that out if he doesn't know it already.
Well, Trump's plan is to clear it out entirely and then redevelop it, maybe a series of hotels on the Mediterranean. He called it the Gaza Riviera,
Yeah.
Mar-a-Gaza, Gaza, right there in the Gaza Strip. I mean, is there any prospect that that could happen, and who'd put up the money to do it?
No, I mean, yeah, oddly enough, the person who I remember talking about Gaza this way was the late president of Israel, Shimon Peres. When Israel got out in 2005, he was talking about Gaza as Singapore. But it's not going to happen. Look, if it were vacant, it would be a wonderful property because it's got whatever it is, 25 miles of Mediterranean shoreline. And if you go back to the days when the Israelis were there, which is what, 1967 to 2005, 15% of all Israeli agricultural production was in Gaza. Fruits, vegetables, it was pretty productive, flowers. But there's no place to move 2 million people. So I think, what's going to happen, I think, is the Arabs are going to propose their plan. And their plan will be to rebuild while the people stay there, which is going to be very difficult because the housing stock is significantly diminished. So you'll have to move in, I don't know, mobile homes, tents, for hundreds of thousands of people. It's doable. I mean, when the Syrians began to leave, the United Arab Emirates, this is 15 years ago, built a refugee camp called Zatari in northern Jordan for 80,000 people. I mean, this kind of thing is possible, but the Arabs have to be willing to do it. I'm hopeful that this kind of push from Trump, who at this point is basically saying, you don't like my plan, you come up with a plan. I am hopeful that it will actually get them to come up with a plan and for the Gulf era, pledge the money.
Well, at the recent meeting in Tel Aviv with Secretary of State Rubio and Netanyahu, Netanyahu endorsed the Trump plan. But have the Israelis come up with a plan as to what would be the way forward?
No, prior to Trump's plan, which one can, like or hate, there was really no plan. I was involved in one of the many groups that, private groups, think tanks, NGOs, that produced a kind of plan. But if you're talking about a government, no Arab government has produced a plan, nor has the US government in the Biden administration, where they had over a year after October 7th, they did not produce a plan. I guess they didn't want to. So there is no plan out there other than Trump's, which is not, I guess you'd say, is a plan. It's a concept. And maybe now there are some Arab League meetings taking place, and now this week, last week, in an effort to head off the Trump plan. So maybe they'll come up with something.
Well, I think the Saudis have come up with a plan which probably isn't acceptable to Israel, which would leave Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and so the threat to Israel would continue.
Well, there are a couple of issues. I mean, the first issue is who governs Gaza. The second issue, more important from the Israeli point of view, security. Who polices Gaza? Who prevents Hamas from rearming?
And the Saudis said a group of technocrats from the Middle East. I mean, who are the technocrats? What are they talking about?
Well, I think you could, just as an example, back in the George W. Bush administration, we kind of forced President Abbas to take Salam Fayyad as finance minister and then prime minister. He is now teaching at Princeton. That's the kind of technocrat who, if you had an international committee for the reconstruction of Gaza, who could lead that committee. But the Saudis seem to be putting on a third requirement, which is that Israel accept all of this as a step toward the two-state solution, toward a sovereign and independent state of Palestine. After October 7th, they're not going to do that. And it's not just Netanyahu, it's not just the Israeli right. It's the moderate and center left and even left parties. The president of Israel, President Herzog, who used to lead the Labor Party, said at the recent Davos meeting that, I've supported the two-state solution my whole life, but now, after October 7th, everything is different.
Well, in your view, there's no future for the two-state solution. Indeed, you appeared to endorse an article in a recent post to the Council on Foreign Relations website, which argued that the two-state solution was dangerous. It would simply prolong and perpetuate the hostilities.
That is my view. I do think that the idea of partition, which has been around forever, really almost a century, is the right idea and was endorsed by the UN in 1948. The question is, what is that Palestinian entity? Is it an independent sovereign state? And that's what seems to me dangerous. I think it should be in a kind of confederation, part of a larger entity. And the two choices are really Israel and Jordan. And it just makes more sense to me that Jordan, a Muslim, Arabic-speaking state, is a lot more sensible than trying to attach that to a Jewish, Hebrew-speaking state.
And they're ethnically distinct. I mean, it's quite different from Northern Ireland, isn't it, where the two parties were pretty much of the same ethnicity. I mean, if you walk down the street in Belfast, you don't know who's a Catholic and who's a Protestant.
Right.
It's quite different in the Middle East.
This would be a little bit more, I used to use the example of Austria-Hungary. That is one king of Jordan, two prime ministers, two parliaments. Others have suggested Kurdistan is the model. That is a kind of semi-autonomous entity, but part of Iraq.
But nevertheless, maybe it's the Arabists in the State Department, or maybe it's those with kind of a diplomatic provenance, continue to endorse a two-state solution. I mean, Richard Haas, in a recent newsletter, talked about an Arab security force and talked about, no Hamas participation and governance in Gaza, but the PLO would have the governance, Palestinian Authority would have the governance. But we would all be working toward a two-state solution. It seems to me, I mean, Arabs I've talked to, and particularly the foreign minister of Qatar, whom I spoke with in the Emirates, he said the two-state solution is dead. They don't want a two-state solution. So is it dead? And if it is dead, why do we continue to pursue it?
Well, I think it's dead. That is, I do not think it will ever happen because it's too dangerous, I think, for Israel. I would actually argue it's too dangerous for Jordan too, but people have not yet accepted that idea in many foreign ministries and in our own foreign ministry, in the State Department. They're just not willing to rethink it. In other cases, I think other Arab diplomats may have reached the conclusion, but it's troublesome to say it out loud. Why would you want to do that? It's very controversial. So they keep their own counsel. But I think we've reached the stage, particularly after October 7th, where it will never happen.
Well, Elliott, by any measure, the Israelis won the Gaza war, no question about it. But the real issue seemed to be immediately afterwards. Did they lose the war of public relations? Did they make Israel a pariah state all over the world because of the killing of civilians in Gaza. Numbers have been thrown out, as many as 30,000. A drop in the bucket compared with the number of civilians we killed in Afghanistan and Iraq, or in Germany in World War II, or in Japan in World War II. But nevertheless, 30,000 is deemed to be a crime against humanity. There are arrest warrants for Netanyahu issued by the International Court of Justice. But then things seem to turn around with the pages that you referred to and its ingenuity, and also the surgical assassination of leaders of Hezbollah and leaders of Hamas. Do you think that the situation has changed somewhat? Is Israel going to emerge from this with a Pyrrhic victory that they won the war in Gaza, but they disdained and hated by most nations in the world?
I think that we began to see that on October 8th of last year, before Israel had actually even gone into Gaza. They hadn't done anything. So I think it's there. I think we have seen a very large wave of anti-Semitism in Europe, in the US, in Australia, in Canada. And I think whatever the Israelis did, winning or losing, there would have been this objection to their activities. They can't win, I would say, that war. What they really need to concentrate on is not, frankly, winning hearts and minds. It's winning the war, because it's a war of survival, ultimately. And they have won back respect for their military and intelligence agencies by being able really to take down Hezbollah, which was thought to be a gigantic threat, in about 3 weeks. So I think they just need to win militarily, and not worry much about demonstrations on college campuses in Sydney and Melbourne, or in New York and Boston.
Now seem to have subsided. Maybe it's the cold weather and the fires, but we don't have the demonstrations now.
We don't have much.
It's strange they arose, and it's strange that they have dissipated.
I think you're right in saying weather has something to do with it. That is, people don't like to spend a lot of time out in 20 degrees. I would wonder if the Trump victory has something to do with it too. A sense of defeat on the part of many of the demonstrators, that is, the country was not listening. And the turnaround for Israel, that is, I think it's easier for them to demonstrate against an Israel that seems to be losing than an Israel that seems once again to be a bunch of winners who really know what they're doing. Now, maybe the demonstrators, or former demonstrators, are the ones who are demoralized.
So it's the old story that Israel perhaps would rather be feared and hated than hated and not feared. So,
well, or loved. Donna Horn wrote a book called "Everyone Loves Dead Jews" a couple of years ago, and certainly the Israelis have made the decision now that they care about international opinion, but it's obviously secondary to survival.
And what about Netanyahu? There's a Chinese proverb that the tallest building attracts the lightning. He was the most hated of all the hated Jews throughout the saga. What is his popularity now in Israel?
It's down. It would be a tough race for him if there were an election held soon. He does not have to hold one soon, but he does have to pass a budget. It's tight. I mean, the most recent polls I've seen suggest that if a few of the opposition people got together, former Prime Minister Bennett, former head of the army Eisenkot, if they joined forces, they'd win. Now that's, last week, and things can look different a month or two from now. But look, Netanyahu has been there, I think, a total of 14 years. If you think of Margaret Thatcher, 10 years, Tony Blair, 10 years, John Howard in Australia, 10 years, this is a really long time. And after a while, people, the enemies just keep piling up on you. So, he can't be prime minister forever. I mean, it seems to me it's another, it's another year or two.
Okay, so Elliott Abrams, I have a question for you because we've unfortunately run out of time because it's been very, very interesting. The question is peace anywhere in sight in the Middle East?
It is conceivable to me that, yes, there'd be an Israeli-Lebanese peace now with Hezbollah really cut down. And, we'll have to see whether the Iranians really want to bomb or are willing to forswear it and make a deal with Trump's envoys.
So a lot of the burden is on Iran.
Yep. Yep.
Iran it is. So Elliott Abrams has been marvelous. As always, thank you for coming by. Thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Don't forget to download our app, CUNY TV app, and you can get all our programs while you're on the go. Be well, take care, and all the best.